I have been the principal of Caldwell Hollow Elementary for 19 years, and I have stood at the front of that auditorium for nearly every assembly we have ever held. I have watched kindergartners recite the pledge with their hands on the wrong side of their chests. I have watched fifth graders cry at graduation because they didn't want to leave. I know what that room feels like when it is full of something good. I also know what it feels like when something mean walks into it. I want to tell you about the day both of those things happened at once. About Rosalie, and about the 30-year-old letter that changed everything, about what this town thought it knew. Rosalie Van was 9 years old the autumn this happened. She was small even for her age, thin-wristed, brown-eyed, with her hair in 2 braids her mother did every morning before the school bus came. She wore a leg brace on her left leg, a fitted metal and plastic apparatus her mother had scraped and saved and negotiated with 3 different insurance offices to obtain. It ran from below her knee to just above her ankle, and it let Rosalie walk without the pronounced drag that had plagued her since she was 4. She didn't talk about it much. Other kids had long since stopped noticing it. It was just part of Rosalie, the way her braids were part of her, the way her habit of leaving little folded paper cranes on teachers' desks was part of her. She was the kind of child who made you believe the world was going to be fine. The assembly that October was supposed to be a career day. We'd invited parents and community members to speak to the upper grades. A few farmers, a nurse from the county clinic, a mechanic who ran the garage on Route 9, and a man named Gerald Pritchett, who sat on the Caldwell Hollow school board, and had recently made what he called a fiscal responsibility tour of the district's programs. He had asked to address the students. I had no particular reason to say no. I had a reason by the time he was done. Pritchett was the kind of man who mistook volume for authority. He stood at the podium in a suit that was too tight across the shoulders and talked for 10 minutes about budget stewardship. Before he got to what he'd actually come to say, the district's individualized accommodation program, the aids, the equipment, the physical adaptations that let children like Rosalie participate fully in school life, was, in his words, a significant drain on resources that could be better allocated. He had charts, he had percentages. He talked about the numbers of students served, and the cost per student, and the question, his word, the question of whether such expenditures were sustainable. He was talking about 9 children in our district. 9. I was already moving toward the podium when it got worse. He gestured, with his hand, in a general sweeping motion toward the seated rows of students, and said that the children in question were, and I remember the exact word, because I have never been able to get it out of my head, being accommodated beyond what the situation reasonably required. Rosalie was in the 3rd row. She didn't flinch. I want you to know that about her. She sat up very straight in her chair, and she looked at him with her brown eyes, and she didn't flinch. But the girl beside her reached over and took her hand, and Rosalie let her, and that was when I saw the color in Rosalie's face change in the way that color changes in a child who is working very hard not to cry in public. I reached the podium. I thanked Mr. Pritchett for his time. I moved the assembly along, but I had not been the only person in that room paying attention. In the back row of the auditorium, where we'd set out chairs for the visiting speakers, there was a man named Dale Cruz. He was there because his brother ran the garage on Route 9 and had asked him to come along. Dale was big, well over 6 feet, heavy through the shoulders, with a beard going gray and a leather cutoff vest over a flannel shirt. The vest had a patch on the back. A compass rose over crossed wrenches, and the words Iron Meridian MC arcing above it. He'd come in quiet, sat in the back, hadn't said much to anyone. He stayed that way through the whole assembly. Through Mr. Pritchett's remarks, through my intervention at the podium, through the students filing out at the end. Then he sat alone in the back row for a long moment, and I watched him look at the chair where Rosalie had been sitting, and I watched something settle across his face like a door, closing quietly from the inside. He left without saying anything to me. I did not think much of it at the time. I should have known better. I have since learned that when a man from the Iron Meridian goes quiet like that, something is usually about to move. What I did not know, what no one outside that clubhouse knew, was what happened that same evening, 40 miles east on Route 9, when Dale Cruz walked into the Iron Meridian's chapter hall and told the room what he had seen. What I did not know was that the club's treasurer, an older man named Hatch, who had been with the chapter longer than almost anyone still writing, heard Dale's account and went pale in a way that stopped the room. Hatch excused himself, went to the back storage room, and came out carrying a metal lockbox that had been on the same shelf, untouched for 30 years. Inside it was a letter. It had been written by a man called Donnie Van, road captain of the Iron Meridian's founding chapter, dead for 30 years after a collision on a wet highway in November of the same year he'd written it. He had written it in the month before he died, sealed it in an envelope, and given it to Hatch with instructions. Keep it until the time is right, and you'll know when that is. Hatch had never known. He'd carried it through 3 clubhouses and 2 chapter consolidations, and 30 years of wondering, and he had never once opened it, because Donnie had asked him not to. And you don't break a dead brother's ask. Dale read it aloud to the room. Donnie wrote that the winter before he died, his chapter had been caught in a blizzard, 2 counties south of Caldwell Hollow. 14 riders, 0 visibility. The kind of cold that gets into iron and makes it brittle. They'd found a farmhouse with a light on, and a woman had opened the door. She had a little girl on her hip, and not much more than that. The farm was in hard times. You could see it in the walls. But she let 14 strangers in from the cold, fed them from what she had, made up floor space, and never asked for a cent or said a word about the leather or the patches. She had asked only one thing. When they left in the morning, she pressed a thermos of coffee into Donnie's hands and said, "You boys be safe out there." Donnie wrote that her name was Carol Van. He wrote that the little girl on her hip was 3 years old. He wrote that the Iron Meridian owed that woman a debt the whole chapter should know about, and that someday they should find a way to pay it. He signed it with his road name and the date and a single line at the bottom. "I trust you'll know the time when it comes, Hatch. Don't let this family go forgotten." The room was quiet for a long time after Dale finished reading. Then the chapter president, a man they called Crossroads, set down his coffee and said, "That little girl on her hip would be about 39 years old now. And she has a daughter of her own." He didn't have to say anything else. The Iron Meridian had 4 active chapters within riding distance of Caldwell Hollow. By the following Thursday, when the school board held its monthly public meeting at the Caldwell Hollow Municipal Hall, 230 riders had confirmed they were coming. I heard about the meeting from the district superintendent's secretary, who had heard from a county commissioner, who had heard from the fire department, who had been asked to verify parking capacity for a very large group. The word that circulated was that some community members might be attending the school board session. Community members. I went early. I sat in the 3rd row. I watched the hall fill up. They came in quietly. That was the thing that undid me. Later, when I tried to describe it, people expected noise, expected the rumble in the show, and instead they filed in with a kind of deliberate calm that was almost more unsettling to watch than any amount of noise would have been. Big men in leather vests, some gray-haired, some young, all of them wearing that Iron Meridian compass rose patch, filling the seats, and then the standing room along the walls, and then the space along the back, row after row, until the Caldwell Hollow Municipal Hall, which seated 220 people, was full past its posted capacity, and still they stood. Carol Van was in the front row. Dale Cruz had called her 2 days before and said only, "There's something we need to tell you, and it would mean a lot if you'd come to the school board meeting Thursday." She'd come because something in his voice made her feel it mattered. Rosalie was with her. Gerald Pritchett arrived 6 minutes late. He walked in still reading something on his phone, glanced up, and stopped walking. The municipal hall stared back at him. The board chair called the meeting to order. The accommodation program was the 3rd item on the agenda. When it came up, Crossroads walked to the public comment podium. He was not the heaviest or the tallest man in that room, but he moved through it as though he had been doing difficult things calmly for a very long time. He set a folded piece of paper on the podium and put on a pair of reading glasses, which somehow made the whole thing more serious, not less. And he read Donnie Van's letter aloud to the board and to Carol Van, who sat in the front row with her hand pressed flat against her sternum and her eyes going bright and unsteady. He read every word of it. "You boys be safe out there." That part, too. When he finished, he folded the letter, took off his glasses, and looked at Gerald Pritchett. He said, "This chapter has carried an unpaid debt for 30 years to this family. We are here to settle it, and we are here to tell this board, with respect, that any program that lets a child like Rosalie Van walk through her own school with her head up is not a line item. It is the whole point of the thing. Quietly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The vote on the accommodation program was 5-1 in favor of full funding. The one dissenting vote was Gerald Pritchett, who resigned from the board 14 days later. I never saw him at another meeting. What happened after the vote is the part that still gets me. The Iron Meridian didn't leave. They'd arranged something with the school. Crossroads had called me 3 days before the meeting, which was how I'd known to go early. Over the next 6 weeks, working around the school schedule, crews from the chapter came in and built out what our accommodation program had never had the resources to finish. A proper ramp to the gymnasium, new adaptive physical education equipment, an accessible restroom renovation in the East Wing. A scholarship fund was established in Donnie Van's name for students with disabilities in the Caldwell Hollow district, seated by the 4 Iron Meridian chapters with enough in it to run for years. Carol Van came to the school the day the gymnasium ramp was dedicated. She stood at the top of it for a while and didn't say anything. Rosalie ran up and down it 4 times, and then sat at the top and looked out at the 4. Jim, satisfied in the way 9-year-olds are when something is exactly right. Dale Cruz was there. He walked over to Carol, and she thanked him, and I watched him shake his head slightly. The way people do when they want to say the debt runs the other way. I have thought about that letter a great deal in the years since. About a man writing it without knowing he had only weeks left, trusting that someone would know when to open it. About 30 years of it, sitting in a lockbox, while a little girl grew up and had a daughter of her own. About the fact that it took a mean man saying a mean thing in a school auditorium for the right person to be sitting in the back row on the right day. I don't know what you call that. Providence, coincidence, luck, long in the making. What I know is what I saw. I saw 230 men in leather vests file into a municipal hall and fill it wall to wall and sit with their hands quiet in their laps while a 30-year-old letter was read aloud. I saw Carol Van's face when she heard her mother described. Her mother, who had been gone 11 years by then, as the woman who'd stood in the cold and opened the door. I saw Rosalie Van sit at the top of that ramp with her leg brace gleaming in the gymnasium light, looking entirely at home. I have been principal of Caldwell Hollow Elementary for 19 years, and I have never seen a room fill up like it did that Thursday in October. I have never seen a town go as quiet as this one did in the days that followed. The way a place gets quiet when it has just been reminded of something it had almost let itself forget. Donnie Van wrote that letter in the last autumn of his life and asked one man to keep it until the time was right. 30 years later, 230 riders drove into a small Missouri town and made sure it meant something. That's what I know about the Iron Meridian. That's what I know about what happens when the right men are sitting in the back row and paying attention.